Apologies everybody, but we gotta make do with this ridiculously terrible, absolutely 1000% awful angle, but the laptop's almost dead, so yeah, I don't know what to tell you guys. I'm very bloated. But I have a few books for you. We'll see how many we can actually get through. But there's 4 here and another 4 over there. You can kind of see them right there. Yeah, cool. Whatever. Alright, let's just get into this. I'm exhausted. I want to get back into Dorothy Must Die by Danielle Page. So let's just see how this goes. Are you guys ready? So I'm just gonna roll with it. And the first book I have is After the Fire by Becky Citra. It looks like this. I feel like I should move this closer, but I don't know how much closer I can get it. Oh, I can get it like directly in front of me. That's cool. Let's change this up a little bit. So I want it softer, brighter. I don't know. I guess we'll just do softer, but like bright soft. Okay. So this is the book, After the Fire. It says, at first, relief flooded her. Nobody in sight, just the bare gray rock gleaming in the hot sun. Then she spotted the blue canoe floating in the reeds. Before Melissa could turn around, someone waded out of the shade cast by the low boughs of a tree overhanging the water. It was a girl in a red bathing suit, standing waist deep. She had long blonde hair that hung down her back and a thin pointed face. She didn't look at all surprised to see Melissa. In fact, Melissa thought afterward it was as if she had expected her. When she spoke, her voice was firm and confident. "Do you come in peace or war?" she said. "What?" said Melissa. Her cheeks turned hot with confusion. The girl's light hazel eyes stared at Melissa steadily. "Are you friend or foe?" Melissa's mother's plans never turn out well, so why should a month at a remote lakeside cabin be any different? Desperate to escape her mother and little brother, Melissa canoes to an island in the middle of the lake where she meets Alice, a strange girl who seems to have a perfect, happy life. Melissa is envious at first and then uneasy as Alice draws her deeper into a dangerous fantasy world where nothing is as it seems. This is a chapter book from the YA section, which is really crazy. So, give me 1 second. Chapter 1. Melissa filled her garbage bag with half-dried clothes, heaved it over her shoulder, and left the laundromat. She glanced up and down the sidewalk, hoping that none of the kids from school would see her. She was positive they all had washing machines and dryers in their houses. She checked to make sure the brochure was still tucked into the back pocket of her jeans. What were the chances of Mom saying yes? Her heart thudded. Why shouldn't she be allowed to go? Mom was working full-time now, and she had hinted that Melissa might be able to do something fun this summer. The apartment building where she lived with her mother and her little brother Cody was 8 blocks away if she followed the main street, but a little bit shorter if she cut down the alley behind the 7-Eleven. Melissa didn't like going that way because there were always a couple of creepy-looking teenagers hanging around the dumpster. She was sure they were doing some kind of drugs. They weren't always the same kids, but they looked the same, with their white faces, blank eyes, and black hoodies. It was such a hot day that she decided to take the shortcut anyway. The garbage bag of damp clothes was already making her shoulder ache. To her relief, the alley was empty, and she hurried as the apartment building came into sight. The sign at the front of the building was missing letters, so instead of saying Skyline Garden Apartments, it said Skyline Garden Apartments. The word garden was a joke unless you counted the pots of geraniums on the balcony of their neighbor, a single woman named Dana, who complained a lot about Cody's noise. Melissa climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and lugged the garbage bag to the door at the end of the hall. She could hear music, and when she opened the door, her mother's loud but throaty laugh. Perfect timing. Mom sounded like she was in a good mood, and Cody was at a birthday party. Melissa left the clothes in the narrow hallway, stepped over one of Cody's trucks, and went into the tiny kitchen. Her mother, Charlene, and her friend Jill were sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Charlene's blonde hair was tied up in a ponytail, her long legs and tight blue jeans were stretched out in front of her, and she was wearing an aqua halter top. Beside her, Jill looked very plain in a white blouse and beige pants. Her mother had a way of doing that to people, Melissa had noticed. Everyone was always surprised when they found out that Melissa, who had dull brown hair and sturdy build, was Charlene's daughter. "Hi, darling," said Charlene. She was holding a cigarette, which she set down in a saucer. "You're an angel. Was it horrible?" "It was okay, but I didn't have enough money, so the clothes aren't dry." "Hi, Melissa," said Jill. "Hi," said Melissa. Melissa was never quite sure what to call Jill. At school, she was Miss Templeton. She taught the fourth grade class across the hall from Melissa's grade 6 classroom, but lately she spent so much time at their apartment she had told Melissa to call her Jill when they weren't at school. There was no way Miss Melissa could do that. Miss Templeton had been Melissa's teacher in grade 4 long before she had become her mother's best friend, so Melissa solved the problem by not calling her anything. There is one thing Melissa just didn't get. Why would Miss Templeton choose to be friends with someone like her mother? Miss Templeton was very nice and very ordinary. She could have been best friends with anyone. Just after Christmas, Charlene had been laid off from her job, waitressing at Smitty's. She had spent weeks trying to find something else. Her smoking increased from 6 cigarettes a day to a pack and a half, and Melissa was terrified that her mother was going to get cancer. Cody had started wetting his bed again, and Melissa had to sign up at the school office for the free lunch program, which was humiliating. And then Charlene greeted her one day after school with this huge smile. "I've got a job, honey. Finally." Melissa was relieved until she found out what it was. The custodian? You're going to be the new custodian at my school? It's temporary. I'm taking over while Mr. Shore is away on sick leave, but I have a feeling it could lead to something permanent. The word is that the poor man is not doing all that well. You can't, Melissa had said instantly. School was hard enough. She didn't fit in, even though she had been going to Huntley Elementary since grade 3. All through grade 3 and most of grade 4, Melissa had been invisible. She was shy at school, and she had never dared to invite kids home. After that terrible night 2 years ago, people started noticing her, but now they felt sorry for her, which wasn't the same as liking her. Her mother, the custodian. She'd be there, sweeping the hallways every day. This was way worse than getting a free lunch. But 3 months later, Melissa had to admit it had turned out okay. Charlene actually liked the job and was thrilled when Mr. Shore decided not to come back. Cody, whose daycare was in a portable behind the school, was ecstatic because he got to see Charlene every day at lunchtime. He'd had 2 months of dry nights. To Melissa's amazement, her mother was popular. Mr. Shore used to leave nasty messages on the blackboard about the students' messy desks. Charlene never did that. The teachers joked around with her, and Miss Templeton, whom Melissa had always liked a lot, became her mother's new best friend. Melissa picked up a cookie from a plate on the table, then she put the cookie down. She had plans to introduce the idea casually, but before she could stop herself, she blurted, "Mom, they had this brochure at school. There's an art camp in Kelowna in July. It's at the university. There's going to be pottery and painting and sculpture," and Melissa produced the brochure and flapped it in the air. Her hands were shaking. "There's even going to be silver casting, and you can make jewelry." "Let me see," said Charlene calmly. Melissa chewed her lip while her mother scanned the brochure. Charlene's eyebrows shot up in the air. "It's $600, sweetie." "It includes your room and all your meals," said Melissa desperately. "I should think so, but $600? That's almost a month's rent." "You said we were saving money now." "Exactly. Saving. I'm not going to blow it all on some art camp." "Mom, please." "No, Melissa, forget it." The back of Melissa's eyes burned. When she had first read the brochure at lunchtime on Friday, the idea of staying at a university with a bunch of kids she didn't know had been scary. But the thought of all that art made her feel dizzy with longing. She had stayed awake for hours that night before thinking about it, planning how to approach Charlene. Now that she had asked, she felt like she would die if she didn't get to go. Charlene took a long drag on her cigarette. "Besides, I need you at home in July. I've been counting on not having to pay for daycare while I'm working. Kids get the whole summer off, but custodians don't." Melissa felt her chances sliding away. "There's a session in August I could go to." "You're not working in August." Charlene looked at Jill. "I've already made plans for August. Jill's made us a wonderful offer." Melissa didn't trust herself to speak. "Jill's going to Europe for 6 weeks. Her brother's using their cabin at Flycatcher Lake in July, but no one's going to be there in August. So she's offered it to us. We get a holiday and we'll give up the apartment so we'll save a whole month's rent." Melissa stared at her mother. "What are you talking about? You can't just give up this apartment." "Why not? What if we don't get another one?" "We will. There's lots of vacancies in this town, and I've been thinking about moving anyway. I think we can afford something a little nicer. We'll line up a new place before we go." "I like it here." Melissa could hear the stubbornness in her voice, and it wasn't even true. She hated the apartment. Nothing ever worked right. The fridge froze, the lettuce. The baseboard heaters rattled, and just last night the cord for the blinds in her bedroom had snapped. Then the first part of Charlene's announcement sank in. Spend a whole month in a cabin at a place called Flycatcher Lake. when she could have been at art camp. It's the end of June in 3 days, said Charlene. I'll give her notice and we'll move out the end of July. Jill spoke for the first time. You'll like it there, Melissa. My sons adore it. It's real wilderness. The lake's warm enough to swim in and we have a canoe. There's even an island to explore and the cabin is rustic but it's cozy. It'll be a holiday. It'll be great for Cody. I used to love going to my grandpa's cabin in northern Ontario when I was a kid. I know, you told me, muttered Melissa. It was the only part of Charlene's childhood that her mother would talk about. She had spent every summer at the cabin until she was 12 and her grandpa had a heart attack and had to sell the place. Melissa had always thought it sounded like a survival test as far as she could tell. All Charlene had done was yank hooks out of fish, swim in a lake full of leeches, and battle black flies. Charlene took a final drag on her cigarette and stubbed it out in the saucer. My last one. Melissa pulled herself away from a horrifying picture of being stuck in a rustic cabin with her brother and mother. What? My last cigarette. As of right now, I've quit. Really? Melissa's voice was cold. I thought quitting smoking was supposed to be hard. It's very hard. At least I think it's going to be. But if I can quit booze and men, I can quit cigarettes. Melissa's cheeks flamed. She hated it when her mother said things like that, but Jill didn't seem embarrassed. She raised her coffee mug. Here, here, to a new life. To a new life, said Charlene. Melissa turned around and flew out of the kitchen. She slammed the door of the bedroom she shared with Cody and threw herself on her bed. Her mother was always talking about their new life ever since the fire 2 years ago. Melissa's tears poured out. It was unfair. When Charlene talked about their new life, it made Melissa feel hopeful. Maybe things really would change. Some things were better, she had to admit. Charlene's boyfriend Darren was gone, and that was no loss. Charlene wouldn't touch even a drop of alcohol anymore. But the money problems were still there, and when Charlene worked, Melissa had more responsibilities at home and with Cody than ever. She sat up and tore the brochure about art camp into tiny pieces. She would never ever want to go back to the way they were before the fire. But feeling hopeful and then being let down so hard was worse than not caring in the first place. So that sounds good. I definitely want to continue it. It's really interesting. I don't know what happened in this fire, and the fact that people know about it, it's kind of gravitating towards definitely want to keep reading. Alright, next we have Anything But Ordinary by Laura Avery. It looks like this. Bryce remembers it like it was yesterday. The scent of chlorine, the blinding crack and flash of pain, blood in the water. When she wakes up in the hospital, all she can think of is her disastrous Olympic diving trial. But everything is different now. Bryce still feels 17, so how can her little sister be 17 too? Life went on without her while she lay in a coma for 5 years. Her best friend and boyfriend have just graduated from college. Her parents barely speak, and everything she once dreamed of doing, winning a gold medal, traveling the world, falling in love, seems beyond her reach. But Bryce has changed too. In seemingly impossible ways, she knows things she shouldn't, things that happened while she was asleep, things that haven't even happened yet. During one luminous summer, as she comes to understand that her dreams have changed forever, Bryce learns to see life for what it truly is, extraordinary. Oh, so she was in a accident. Alright. Most divers forget to see the air. You focus on your body, how to make it into a thin board, or curl it up like a piece of spaghetti and flatten it back out. You lift off and you barely have time to think before you hit the water. But Bryce, she would never forget where she was going when she was about to jump. She would never forget the small eternity between the stone platform and the deep blue below. Bryce Graham, reporters asked her. Only 17? What's your secret? She would usually say something easy, something written on an inspirational t-shirt. Concentration, she would say. Focus. Things that should be said into microphones, but never. Fear, Ted. Fear. That day, Bryce was carried up the stairs by the noise of the crowd. They yelled louder for her than for anyone else. This was her home, after all. Those were people from her high school in the stands, though she didn't know most of them. The Tennessee fans wore little clothing and were red in the face, yelling and yelling. The out-of-towners wore Olympic trials t-shirts and fanned their pale faces with programs. One of them had become as red as anyone in Nashville on account of the heat. He had gone to the concession stand for a soda, a Coke, and a sweating plastic bottle. He watched from a spot at the back of the building, propping the exit door open with his foot. He slipped his Coke, and a cicada landed on the bleachers. The crowd went silent as Bryce crouched at the end of the platform like a cicada herself. Bryce jumped. She was bending, coiled, and the insect rubbed its legs together, calling out to any other cicada that might be nearby. She was bending, coiled, and the man from out of town felt the breeze on his face. She was bending, coiled, in the small eternity between block and blue. She was only 17. What was her secret? Space, Bryce answered, but there was less than she thought, and her tight twist was an inch longer than it should have been, and the inch happened to be on the curve of her lovely head. Her skull jutted over the cement platform, and the weight of her body went falling into the empty Tennessee air. If you asked Bryce's mama how long was a cicada, she would answer, about 1 inch. And if you asked her daddy, it'd be the same answer. Bryce Graham's sister, too, and her friends, Nashville people. If you asked that man from out of town, he wouldn't know, but he could hear it calling out into the air the moment before a plume of blood colored the pool dark red. Whoa. What just happened? What? I hope this goes back because I'm really confused now. Alright, Chapter 1. Heartbeat has been generally faster. Who said that? Match sound with image. Lights and metal and movement. A woman's hands untying something. Sounds but no image. Try again. Get her records, a voice said. She's coming. Before the sound cut out again, the light pulled brighter and brighter. This was a game Bryce played. How long would it take for the endless exhaustion to set in? Sometimes she bothered to open her eyes, but it was difficult enough just to remember that she had been around once, being and talking. The very idea made her retreat back into the dark. It hurt to be alive. But she had been playing sound plus image for a while now. 5 days? 5 hours? Even if it was 5 minutes, the sensation was a strong one. Someone's breath was on Bryce's face. Get her parents on the phone. Bryce's parents. She had heard their voices in the darkness, but she could never make out their words. They had touched her shoulder, rubbed her forehead, but Bryce was too tired. I can't, she tried to say. I can't move. Bryce? Bryce could tell by her tone the woman was trying to speak softly, but she wanted to put her hands over her ears. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She opened her eyes. Light flooded into her skull. Colors became shapes. Shapes became people. The smells and sounds switched on like a machine. The acidy scent of cleaner, mechanized human humming, metal creaking. A gray-haired woman leaned over her with a stethoscope, blocking the fluorescent lights. She was awake. I'm hungry, Bryce had breathed, though it was a pain to talk. The room was silent, save for the beeping of machines and the slurping of liquid jello from a straw. She moved her tongue through the sweet substance, relearning the motions of every swallow. The movements were blurry, but everything else came at her with an edge. The hospital room was the beige color of pale skin and seemed to throb. Her mother sat near the bed in an electric pink bathrobe. Her father stood next to her mother in his same old gold and black Vanderbilt sweatsuit, coach emblazoned on the chest. Their faces erupted in teary smiles as her gaze hit them. It was all different. Her mother's hair was shorter, for one, and her dad had lost some weight. They had been waiting for a long time. What had happened? Bryce? The voice from earlier, now softer, came from a short-haired woman in a white coat. My name is Dr. Warren. Do you know where you are? Hospital, Bryce said in a dull monotone that didn't sound like her voice. She cleared her throat. Hospital, Bryce repeated in a higher, lighter tone, looking at her parents. Dr. Warren kept writing on her clipboard. Do you know what you are recovering from? Bryce swallowed. Her throat felt like sand. She could do this. Push yourself. I was asleep. Dr. Warren nodded. You were in a coma. You suffered serious head trauma. In order to heal, your brain eliminated your consciousness for quite some time. The dive, Bryce thought, the blinding crack coming back to her in a flash of pain. The memory replayed itself again as Dr. Warren spoke, and for a strange moment Bryce could see herself from the stands, a blur in a colorful swimsuit, falling to the water. The good news is that your brain's healing progress was not as absent or slow as we had thought. We'll do some more MRIs, but it looks like your cognitive functions will continue to improve. Why can't I move? Bryce asked. Beside her, the heart monitor began to beat more quickly, as if warning her, as if her body knew something she did not. Your recovery depends on how well your muscles return from extended disuse, Dr. Warren replied carefully. Recovery. Her brain was foggy, but the word never meant much to her. She avoided injury. For competitive athletes, there was could or could not. There was no recover. She looked at her hands. They didn't move much, but they looked fine, a little pale and thin maybe. How long was I asleep? Dr. Warren looked at Bryce's mother, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. Her mother nodded at Dr. Warren. The doctor started in slowly. Bryce, you've been unconscious for a while. Some things have changed. Bryce felt blood rush to her cheeks. She ignored the doctor's steady gaze, trying and failing to clench her fist, feeling for the first time the presence of tubes stuck in her forearm. Where's Sydney? Bryce's curly-haired 12-year-old sister was probably taking advantage of her stay at the hospital that very moment, going through her stuff, putting on her junior prom dress, and pretending she was a Broadway star. Your sister is out, her father said, crossing his arms. Out? Doing what? Sid, well, her mother tightened the tie on her pink bathrobe. She's gotten older. We all have. Even you. She laughed a little. Bryce noticed the circles underneath her mother's light blue eyes, the gray glinting in her dad's close-cropped hair. They hadn't answered her. How long? She was interrupted by fast footsteps, the squeak of the candle, a bang on the wall as the door flung open. A tall, pale teenage girl loped in. She looked familiar. Bryce's mother sprang up. Not now. She stood between Bryce and the girl. Yes, now. Are you kidding? The girl responded. Please, her mother said, but it was more like a command. From the other side of the bed, Bryce's father said loudly, Elizabeth, just... He finished his sentence by shaking his head. The girl wore fishnets and heavy-soled boots. Bryce glanced at her parents, but their eyes were fixed on the floor, back to the girl. Dark waves, their father's big dark eyes. Sydney. The girl was Sydney. Bryce's heart skipped a beat. Her mother stood over the chair. Please, she's not ready. She's disoriented. Seriously, Mom, Sydney said through gritted teeth. Maybe now would be a good time to pretend I'm part of this family. Dr. Warren moved toward the door. I'll give you all some time. Bryce! The girl grasped the support poles on either side of the hospital bed as if the sight of Bryce made her dizzy. The smell of cigarettes filled Bryce's nose. She frantically looked for the dark freckle near Sydney's ear, the one Sydney pretended was an earring. It was there. You're awake, Sydney whispered. How? Bryce began but stopped when Sydney looked straight at her, mascara streaked down her round cheeks. How old are you? Me? Sydney landed her black fingers on her chest. Bryce noticed for the first time a small hoop piercing her lip. I'm 17. 17. Bryce felt like she was underwater, trying to swim to the surface. She'd been asleep for 5 years. She was 22? Oh my God, Bryce breathed. Her blood was pumping so hard it felt like it was trying to escape her fingers. Tears leaked out from her eyes, running down her face. She thought of her calculus exam, the one she'd barely studied for. Olympic trials, graduating from Hillwood High. She was supposed to stand next to Gabby. They'd planned it. Greg would be at her other side. What now? She couldn't look at anyone, though they were all looking at her. She closed her eyes. Bile welled in her throat, and heat grew on her forehead, stabbed by pinpricks of pain. The hospital window was imprinted on the back of her eyelids, the world outside of it changing from night to day, and in another moment she felt the room was bathed in moonlight and sunlight, dusk and dawn. A hospital room, the shades strong. Bryce realized she was looking at her own sleeping form on a strange, distant afternoon. Her family drifted around the hospital bed looking like they used to. Her mother's eyes were glazed as if they had been emptied of tears. She lay her head on the bed next to Bryce's body. Her father paced the room, his coaching whistle around his neck, anxiously running a hand through his dark hair. Sydney was still 12 years old. She sat in the patterned chair in the corner, her head in her hands, her body shaking silently. Nobody moved to comfort her. Then the pain that had risen up so quickly vanished, and Bryce was blinking into the glare of the fluorescent lights. Her family stared back at her, still shadows of the people she knew. She wished this older, sadder version of her mom and her dad and her sister would go away and come back as their usual selves. With the pain, she thought of their faces as she had last seen them, flushed and beaming above Go Bryce t-shirts. She had huddled with them in a big group hug. Her dad reminded her to watch the timing on her back tuck. Her mother told her to loosen her goggles, that they looked too tight. Then Greg and Gabby jumped in behind her, and they were all smiling nervously at each other, their heads close together. Gabby reached to give Bryce's face a couple of playful slaps. Focus, she cried. Greg stretched across the huddle, and his lips met hers in a soft, sweet kiss. Felt like yesterday, not 5 years ago. She'd awoken from nightmares before, but the jello rose up in her stomach as she realized she would never wake up from this. This was her life now. I can't believe you guys, Sydney said, grabbing the arms of her chair. Why doesn't she know that already? Why didn't you tell her? Sydney, your input is unnecessary right now. Their father fumbled for his wallet. I'm getting one of those crappy coffees. He muttered and walked out of the room, their mother following, talking in a low whisper. It was the first time they'd so much as moved since she woke up. Sydney scooted closer to the bed. She continued to stare at Bryce in disbelief, as if at any moment Bryce would disappear. Have they told you anything that happened? She slurred. Bryce stared. Sydney, are you drunk? Did they tell you about everything? About Greg and Gabby? That's enough. Bryce's mother's voice came sharply from the doorway. She handed her coffee to Sydney. Bryce kept her eyes on her sister, begging her to go on. Bryce just woke up. her mom said in a gentler tone. She sat on the bed, crossing the long legs Bryce had inherited. She brushed her hair from Bryce's eyes. You must be tired. The opposite. Her body was heavy, but everything else felt flurried now, like snowflakes that were scattering away, and her mind was scrambling to catch it all. She wanted to move, but instead only her eyes darted looking at Sydney. Do Greg and Gabby know I'm awake? Her mother reached out to touch Bryce's cheek. Let's just slow down. I agree. Dr. Warren had re-answered, flipping a page on her clipboard. Though her vital signs are excellent, with the extraordinary amount of cerebral activity that has occurred in such a small amount of time, Bryce is at risk for any number of brain malfunctions. Bryce tried to meet her family's eyes to show them somehow she was ready to wake up, for good. She wasn't a piece of faulty equipment breaking down, malfunctioning. She was here. She was back. Dr. Warren put her hand on Bryce's shoulder. Bryce, you've been amazing through all of this. You're really strong, but we don't know what's going to happen in the next few days or even in the next few hours. Bryce barely heard. She wondered when Greg and Gabby were going to come. Were they really 22 years old? Was she really 22 years old? This was the last place she'd wanted to be in 5 years. She should have won at least one gold medal by now, and said she was caught in a straitjacket of her own body. My one commandment is rest. I know it seems silly, but the best thing is sleep, okay? Got it, Bryce said, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Every second more was coming back. Her nerves had faded, and all that was left were hard truths. She couldn't move her legs. That needed to change. I've got to get going, Bryce thought. I've got to get back to normal. Say goodnight, everyone. You can sleep in the waiting room if you like. We'll be watching her closely. Bryce's father leaned down to kiss Bryce on the cheek. Good night, sweetheart. We'll be right outside. See you in the morning, her mother said, reaching down to do the same. Then she whispered in Bryce's ear, You don't know how wonderful it is that I get to say that. Night, Bryce. Cindy backed out of the room awkwardly. Dr. Warren was the last to leave, smearing her makeup as she rubbed her eyes. Get some rest. Bryce wished she could lift her arm to wave. They were sandbags, heavy at her sides. The door swung open, letting in a silver of fluorescent light from the hospital hallway. The beam of light widened into an arc across the floor as Dr. Warren paused at the entrance. Then she closed the door, muffling the noise of the hallway and leaving Bryce alone in the dark. Oh, yeah, that is definitely going to be read. That sounds freaking amazing. Alright, give me 1 second here. Alright, next we have One Good Thing by Wendy Wex. I have no idea what this is in regards to. It says, embroiled in a battle to regain control of their renovation-turned reality TV show Do-Over, Maddie, Avery, Nikki, and Kyra find themselves holding tight to the frayed ends of their friendship and relationships. Maddie must face the realities of dating a rock star who is once again topping the charts and dealing with her hapless ex-husband. Avery is caught up in family drama even as she attempts to transform a tiny cottage into a home for the newly impoverished Iris who helped bankroll their last renovation. Put on bed rest, a hugely pregnant Nikki can't quite believe love can last or trust in her own maternal instincts, and Kyra, who has secretly put Bella Flora at risk in an attempt to salvage Do-Over, must decide whether to accept a desperately needed bailout from her son's famous father that comes with far too many strings attached. But friendship is made for times like these to keep each other and their dreams from crumbling. No idea, guys. Alright, so there is a prologue before we start. Midlife crises come in all shapes and sizes. They can manifest in the form of a shiny red sports car, a distant mountain peak demanding to be scaled, a new head of hair, or a plastic bottle of little blue pills. Bertrand Baynard starred an exotic dancer named Delilah with whom he fell in love, fathered a child, and ran away. His wife, Bitsy, discovered this late one January afternoon when their private banker called to confirm that Bertie had transferred the last of their holdings to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, and to let her know that the mortgage Bertie had taken out on their Palm Beach estate was seriously in arrears. Which was when she realized that Bertie was not actually in Aruba fishing as he'd claimed, but on his way to a shining new life that did not include her. Stunned and silent, she wandered the huge house and its lush grounds, trying not to remember that it was Bertie who'd fallen in love with the aging Palladian villa and then overseen every detail of its 3-year restoration. At night she lay awake in the bed they'd shared, staring up into the high-shadowed ceiling, her cheeks and pillow damp with tears. Bertie, whom Nicole Grant of Heart Incorporated had found for her, whom she had married and loved, and who had generally seemed to love her back, was gone, and he'd taken her money with him. As a child, Bitsy had been slightly embarrassed by the size of her fortune and the fact that neither she nor her parents had had a hand in making it. In her teens, she'd felt twinges of guilt that there was so many who had so little when she had so much. But while she had been an earnestly philanthropic adult, the millions she donated had been put but droplets from the Amazonian-sized river of money on which she'd floated. That river had lubricated all wheels, opened any doors she'd ever chosen to walk through. Like a soft-focused lens, it had tempered the adjectives used to describe her, turned her horsey face long, her too narrow nose aristocratic, her scrawny body fashionably slim. She'd been so certain of Bertie's affection that she'd refused to let him sign the prenup he suggested. In their decade and a half of marriage, he had validated her faith in him and even protected their financial reservoir from Malcolm Dyer's Ponzi scheme. When others had lost everything, her fortune had remained intact, free-flowing and bottomless. Ready? Sorry, I heard like a ticking sound. I don't know if the audio picked that up. She had never imagined that it could dry up or disappear, or that the very person who had safeguarded it might simply walk away with it. The sun was painfully bright in the sky, a too cheery blue, as she watched her possessions inventory tagged and carried away by the auction company. She kept her chin up, her face carefully blank, and her eyes dry as the Lalique chandelier that had belonged to her grandmother and the Louis IX chairs that had been her mother's were loaded into the van. It took 2 days to empty the house. When it was done, she felt the hollow ache of loss, a cessation of who she'd always been. Despite her philanthropy, her attempts to see herself as more than just a rich woman, it had always been her money that defined her. Who was she without it? Where would she go? How would she live? She had an Ivy League education, a million volunteer hours, and no actual work experience. She knew how to throw a party, how to hire good help, how to make conversation, how to have a good time. She did not know how to be poor, and she had a sinking feeling she was not going to be good at it. I just have this creepy little inkling that I'm not going to like this book. Just saying. Okay, so I was going to read this, but I can already tell you with just the way that the writing in it was, I'm not going to like it. And so that is going bye-byes. The next book I have for you is Renee Carlino's Before We Were Strangers, a love story. A love-hate story, but yeah. I don't know. Looks like it's going to be good, so. Says, first movement recently. Do you still think of me? Matt. Life was passing me by at high speed as I sat back with my feet up, rejecting change, ignoring the world, shrugging off anything that threatened to have meaning or relevance. I categorically disagreed with all things current. I despised the use of emojis, the word meta, and people who talked on their phones online. Don't even get me started on gentrification. There were 21 Starbucks within a 3-block radius of the building I worked in. Recording studios, film labs, and record stores were dying, if not already baking corpses turned cupcake shops or blow-dry bars. They had stopped playing music videos on MTV and had banned smoking in bars. I didn't recognize New York anymore. There are the things I pondered while sitting in my 4x4 cubicle at National Geographic. It hadn't felt National or Geographic since I had taken a desk job there a few years before. I had come out of the field where I had seen everything, and I went into a hole where I saw nothing. I was in the middle of the city I loved, back in her arms again, but we were strangers. I was still hanging on to the past, and I didn't know why. Scott smacked me square on the back. Hey, buddy, Brooklyn for lunch? Why so far? I was sitting at my desk, fidgeting with the battery in my phone. There's a pizza place I want you to try. Sisiko's. You heard of it? We can get good pizza on 5th. No, you have to try this place, Matt. It's phenomenal. What's phenomenal, the pizza or the staff? Since my divorce a few years ago, Scott's boss friend and eternal bachelor had high hopes that I'd become his permanent wingman. It was impossible to talk him out of anything, especially when it involved women and food. You got me. You have to see this girl. We'll call it a work meeting. I'll put it on the company card. Scott was the type who talked about women a lot and about porn even more. He was severely out of touch with reality. I'm sure this qualifies as sexual harassment somewhere. He leaned against the top of the cubicle partition. He had a nice-looking face and was always smiling, but if you didn't see him for a week, you'd forget what he looked like. We'll take the subway. Hey guys, my ex-wife walked by sipping a cup of coffee. I ignored her. Hey Liz, Scott said as I stared at her ass as she walked away. He turned to me. Is it weird to work with her and Brad? I've always worked with her and Brad. Yeah, but she was your wife and now she's Brad's wife. I honestly don't care anymore. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. That's a good sign. I believe you. That's how I know you're ready for some strange. I often ignore these types of comments from Scott. I need to stop by Verizon first and get a new battery, I said, waving my phone. What is that? A cell phone. Pretty sure you've seen one before. First of all, no one says cell phone anymore. Second, that's not a phone. That's an artifact. We should ship it to the Smithsonian and get you an iPhone. On the way out, we passed Kitty, the coffee cart girl. Hello, gentlemen. I smiled. Kitty? She blushed. Scott said nothing until we got into the elevator. You should tap that. She totally wants you. She's a child. She's a college graduate. I hired her. Not my type. Her name is Kitty. Alright, now you're just being mean. He seemed minimally offended on Kitty's behalf. I'm fine. Why is it everyone's mission in life to set me up? I'm fine. Clock's a ticking. Guys don't have clocks. You're 36. That's young. Not compared to Kitty. The elevator doors opened and we stepped into the lobby. A giant print of one of my photos ran the length of a wall. See that, Matt? That gets women wet. It's a picture of an Iraqi child holding an automatic weapon. The Pulitzer you got for it, genius, not the picture. That was a good year for you. Yeah, it was. Professionally, anyway. I'm telling you, you have to use that to your advantage. You have a moderate amount of celebrity because of that photo. It's worked in my favor. How did it work for you exactly? I might have borrowed your name for a night, once or twice. I laughed. That's disgraceful, man. Kitty's into you. You should give that little hottie what she wants. You know there's rumors about her. Even more reason to stay away. No, good rumors, like she's crazy, a little animal. And that's good how? We made our way outside and headed for the subway station on West 57 to catch the F train. Midtown is always congested at that hour, but we were nearing the end of winter. The sun beating down between the buildings drew even more people out onto the street. I weaved in and out of the masses while Scott trailed me. Right before we reached the station entrance, he spoke loudly from behind. She'd probably be into anal. I stopped and faced him at the top of the steps going down. Scott, this conversation is wrong in so many ways. Let's just end it here, okay? I'm your boss. Exactly. I trotted down the steps toward the turnstiles. There was an old woman playing a violin at the bottom of the steps. Her clothes were dingy and her hair was a gray, matted mess. The strings on her bow were hanging off like floating foxtails, but she was playing Brahms flawlessly. When I threw $5 in her case, she smiled. Scott shook his head and pulled me along. I'm trying to keep you happy and productive, Matt. I swiped my MetroCard. Give me a raise. That will keep me happy and productive. The station was crowded, a train was pulling up, but we were stuck behind a huge group of people who were pushing toward the front like they had somewhere important to be. Scott was content to hang back and stare at a woman who had her back toward us. She stood near the edge of the platform, rocking from heel to toe, balancing on the thick yellow line. There was something striking about her. Scott elbowed me and then waggled his eyebrows and mouthed, "Nice ass." I wanted to punch him in the neck. The more I looked at the woman, the more I felt drawn to her. She had one thick blonde braid running down her back, her hands were shoved into the pockets of her black coat, and it occurred to me that, like a child, she was teetering joyously to the rhythm of the violin echoing against the station walls. When the train finally pulled up, she let people rush past her and then stepped in at the last second. Scott and I stood on the yellow line, waiting for the next, less crowded train. Just as the train doors closed, she turned around. Our eyes locked. I blinked. Holy shit. Grace? She pressed her hands to the glass and mouth mat, but the train was pulling away. Without thinking about it, I ran. I ran like a crazy person to the end of the platform, my hand outstretched, willing the train to stop, my eyes never leaving hers, and when I ran out of platform, I watched the train fly into the darkness until she was gone. When Scott caught up to me, he looked at me cautiously. Whoa, man, what was that about? You look like you saw a ghost. Not a ghost. Grace. Who's Grace? I was stunned, staring into the void that had swallowed her. A girl I used to know. What? Like the one who got away? Scott asked. Something like that. I had one of those. Janie Bowers, first girl to give me a blowy. I beat it to that image until I was, dirty. I ignored him. All I could think about was Grace. Scott went on. She was a cheerleader, hung around my high school lacrosse team. They all called her the therapist. I didn't know why. I thought she was going to be my girlfriend after that blowy. No, not like that. Grace and I dated in college right before I met Elizabeth. Oh, like that. Well, she looked good. Maybe you should try to get in touch with her. Yeah, maybe, I said, but thought there's no way she'd still be single. I let Brody, the 17-year-old salesperson at Verizon, talk me into the newest iPhone. It actually costs $8 less a month to have a newer phone. Nothing in this world made sense to me anymore. I was distracted while signing the documents because the image of Grace on the train floating off into the darkness had been running on a constant loop in my mind since we had left the station. Over pizza, Scott showed me how to play Angry Birds. I thought that was a big step toward overcoming my technology phobia. The Girl Scout was hoping to see wasn't working, so we ate our pizza and headed back to the office. Once I was back at my cubicle, I Googled Grace's name in every possible variation, first, middle, and last names, first and last names, middle and last names, with no luck. How was this possible? What kind of life was she leading that kept her completely off the internet? I thought about what had happened to us. I thought about the way she looked on the subway, still beautiful, like I remembered, but different. No one would ever describe Grace as cute, even though she was petite. She was too striking to be cute, with her big green eyes and massive mane of blonde hair. Her eyes had seemed hollow, her face a bit harder than when I last saw her. It had only taken one glance for me to know she wasn't the effervescent free spirit I'd known years ago. It made me crazy wondering what her life was like now. Cheers erupted from the break room down the hall. I wandered over to witness the tail end of my ex-wife announcing her pregnancy to her coworkers. It wasn't long after my divorce that I became acutely aware of everyone around me carrying on, living life. I was static, standing on the platform, watching train after train go by, wishing I knew which one to be on. Elizabeth was already at the next stop, starting a family while I was slinking back to my shitty cubicle, hoping not to be seen. I was indifferent toward her and her pregnancy news. I was numb, but I shot her an email anyway out of some residual obligation still lingering from our failed marriage. Elizabeth, congratulations. I'm happy for you. I know how badly you wanted a child. Best, Matt. 2 minutes later, my email pinged. Best? Really? You can't say love after spending over a decade of your life with me? I didn't respond. I was in a hurry. I needed to get back on the subway. Okay. I like that. I like that a lot. I definitely think that's going to be something that we are definitely going to be reading. Alright. I want to see super quickly. I know I shouldn't be page counting, but, you know, when you only have a limited time. There's got to be something that's like 6 pages, maybe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sorry, guys. I hate to do this, but it's really hard to do this when your boyfriend's on his way home. So, and I just want to get through these a little bit faster to know what I'm actually going to keep and what I'm not. Okay, unfortunately those are not going to make it into this video. They'll make it into another video at another point. I apologize. Like I said at the beginning, I do want to get back into Dorothy Must Die by Danielle Page. I'm on chapter 5, and it's going really, really well. I'm almost 50 pages in, and I don't want to stop. I want to pick it back up again. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy this. I will see you guys in the next one. There will be like maybe 2 or 3 more of these, depending on how fast I can actually read and how many of my books are actually short chaptered to be able to do this, because as you know, if it is more than 10 or 11 pages for a chapter, it is a no-show on video. That's kind of cool. Alright, well, I will talk to you guys later and have a great night. Bye! See you tomorrow.